Morning, Troy.
How are you?
Doing well. The Cowboys have their new head coach. We talked to you about Brian Schottenheimer last week when it looked like he was the leading candidate. Now he's off and running as the head coach, putting a staff together. What'd you think of his introductory news conference the other day?
I thought it was great. Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I thought he handled everything really well. Clearly a big day for him and his family, and of course, what his dad Marty meant to him. The one thing I would say is, I understand it and we talked about it last week, that as far as I think some of the frustration with the fans and not feeling that maybe some people weren't interviewed that maybe should have been some of the people that are hot coaching commodities in this hiring cycle, but. At the end of the day, I think a lot of owners, what they want is to be able to win the headlines the day after the press conference or when it's announced. And in Chicago, they won the headlines getting Ben Johnson. And I saw one where they said Chicago got their guy, Chicago got the right guy, or whatever it was said in numerous publications. But the reality is nobody knows. It feels good because that was the guy that so many teams had targeted as their head coach, and Chicago was able to land him, and he could go on and be a great head coach, and I hope that he is. Would love to see Chicago get competitive on a regular basis, but the reality is nobody knows these first-time head coaches as to how they're going to do, and for that matter, you don't even know how a seasoned head coach is going to be, but at least you've got a track record to go off of. So I say that. And although the majority of people may say, Brian Schottenheimer didn't have opportunities in other places, and yet he lands the Dallas Cowboys job, none of it really matters right now. It doesn't matter who they hired in Chicago. It doesn't matter who they'll hire in New Orleans or Brian Schottenheimer in Dallas. That all of them now will be judged on what happens when the season rolls around. And if they win, people will say what a great hire that was, and if they lose, it'll be a bad hire. And it's just the way that it is. So he is the head coach. He's in a position now to do what he hopes to do and get the team back on track. And time will tell as to what that might look like. But as we talked about last week, trying to pick a head coach that has no head coaching experience. And projecting as to whether or not that guy is going to be successful, because there is so much that goes into whether or not a head coach even is going to have success, is like picking a quarterback in the first round. It's just it's a flip of the coin as to whether or not they're ultimately going to do what you hope they can.
He said all the right things in that press conference. He talked about wanting to establish the culture here, and I was reminded of Jason Garrett's opening press conference, and Jason also came in with the right ideas, I thought. He wanted to establish a culture, accountability. We're going to be on time to meetings. And then over his 10 years, he found it difficult to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is Brian Schottenheimer also going to find it difficult to do that for the reasons that we all know?
Oh, sure. Absolutely will. I mean, every coach has that's been there. It's part of it. It's part of the challenges of the job, and that's why, everyone had these conversations back when Al Davis was still alive and running the Raiders. The Raiders had not enjoyed much success. They had struggled for a number of years, and it didn't much matter who was brought in. Now Dallas has had much more success in the regular season than the Raiders did, but there's something that's keeping Dallas from doing more, and that's what they've got to figure out. And I've said it a million times. It can't just be that we're going to replace the head coach, and then that's the answer. They've got to do a much deeper dive. I mean, I've got my opinions on what that might look like, but they've got to do a deeper dive into. I mean, it's just any business. If you're not doing what you ultimately want to do, you've got to evaluate where you're at and what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how do we make this better. And like any great organization, it starts at the top. I mean, it's not a novel concept. It is what it is. So, yeah, there's a lot of guys, Jason being one of them, and obviously Jason's a really close friend of mine, and I know what he's about, and I know what he wanted to build, and he was there, right alongside me as a player. So the same things that I watched and witnessed as a player when I was in the building are the same things that he saw, and much of which we discussed and would have conversations about. So he was probably more prepared than anybody as far as stepping into that situation and trying to have success with it. We'll see. I like Brian a lot, as we talked about last week. I hope he's able to do it, and I hope he's able to do it for all the right reasons. But I also near the top of that list, if not at the top of the list, is I hope he does it for the Cowboys fans. It pains me that these Cowboys fans they invest a lot. It's important to them. They live and die each and every week with the success of the Cowboys. They spend hard-earned money, on whether it's tickets to the game, concessions, jerseys, whatever it might be, supporting the organization. And I don't know that they deserve better, but after all these years, I guess it's fair to say they deserve better. And seeing a team do a little bit more in the postseason than what this team's done.
Talking football with the Hall of Famer Troy Aikman here on the ticket. Brian Schottenheimer mentioned running the football, and he was very proud of the fact that when he was in Seattle, they led the league in rushing twice. And as we kind of transition to the championship games, we'll take Philly first. Is the running back and the running game officially back now in the NFL?
I think it is. I really do. I think the pendulum has swung back to where teams are reassessing how they've done things and the importance of running the football. And it took time to get away from it, and a lot of it had to do with the rules and how the rules were then favoring the passing game and the explosion of points being scored and offensive football and what defensive backs were able to do and all of that. But I do feel that the running game has kind of come back, and I'm happy to see that. I really, as a player, we obviously ran the ball well, and I don't know that our passing game really got enough credit. I've said this a lot, that we didn't throw it as much as a lot of these other teams, as the 49ers and the Packers and Dolphins and others. So we were never going to lead the league in offense, but when we did throw it, we threw it as well, if not better, than everybody. Our yards per pass, there were years we were number one. So we were really good when we threw it. And I think you have to have some balance, and that's the key. I think when you get one-dimensional, you've got some problems. And not to mention that running the ball, I think it's hard to be a tough physical football team or regarded as that without running the ball. You get labeled as finesse, you get labeled as soft. And I feel that the offensive line, more than any other position group, really sets the tone for the entire team. And if you've got a big, physical, tough offensive line, as we did, then you can kind of flex your muscle a little bit, and you're thought of then as this physical, tough-minded team. And so there's a lot to being able to run the ball, and what that does for your entire football team, defense included. So, yeah, I like what Philadelphia's done. Love Saquon Barkley. Thrilled to see him have the year that he's had after running behind that offensive line that he had to in New York for so many years. Now he got behind one of the better ones, and we've seen what he's been able to do. And now it's kind of an afterthought as far as, well, do you pay these running backs or do you not pay these running backs after what Derrick Henry did this year and then Saquon Barkley? I think the landscape of free agency for some of these guys might look a little different than it has in other years.
Yeah, for sure. On the AFC side, the Chiefs did it to the Bills again. You were partly responsible for Bills fans' misery over the years because you beat them twice in the Super Bowl, and they could never get over that hump. And those Bills teams in the early 90s were great teams.
Yeah.
And these Bills teams appear to be really good, maybe great teams, but they can't get over this Kansas City hump, can they?
They can't, and Baltimore can't either. That just seems to be, it's a tough position to be in. I do, and it's strange, and I'm sure Buffalo fans kind of would look at me sideways if they heard this, but I I really like that organization. I mean, I love that organization, to be honest with you. Even the guys from our era that lost those 4 Super Bowls, when we go back to Canton for the Hall of Fame weekend, those guys are really close. I mean, they all hang out together the whole weekend. They're always in a big group. The guys that made it into the Hall of Fame, and then the fans that they have, the team, Josh Allen, everything about that organization. I just want to see them win, and they just haven't been able to get past Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And the same for Baltimore. I was just having this conversation yesterday that, here you've got Lamar Jackson. By all accounts, he'll be the MVP this year. He was first-team All-Pro. Josh Allen was second. So, you take that and you'd say, well, then that probably means he's going to be the league MVP. And if he is, that would mean 3 league MVPs at such a young age, and yet he's not advanced to the Super Bowl. And Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs are the ones that are holding everything up. So it's tough on those teams because no one cares. They just don't. And if you don't win the Super Bowl, you kind of get lost in the footnotes of history. So they've got to. And getting back, I mean, you think about how good each of those teams, the years that they had, and to try to get back into January 2026 and all that you've got to go through, it's a lot. It is a lot. And that's why it's hard. It's hard for teams to do that. It's just mentally exhausting. And hopefully they can continue to be competitive, and maybe they'll break through, a little bit like Phil Mickelson breaking through and winning his first, major championship, and that would be a good moment. But the Super Bowl, with it being a rematch, what's the interest in that game nationally? I don't really know. But if it had been Buffalo, Washington, some new teams, we went through it when we won. New England went through it. Kansas City's gone through it. I think people just get fatigued seeing the same team. But hats off to Kansas City and what they've accomplished. They're in the middle of an amazing run, and it doesn't appear, based on how they do things, that's going to slow down anytime soon.
It's not the reason why they lost the game, but it was a big play in the game where they had a 1-point lead. Buffalo did. Fourth quarter, they go for it on 4th and inches, and they don't get it. It looked like they got 2 bad spots in a row on 3rd down and 4th down. With the rules people you talk to, are we close to getting some sort of change in how a ball is marked, or maybe quick video correction more and more in key situations of, no, put it at the 40, it's a first down?
Yeah, it would seem. The frustration for me when I'm calling a game is that we show replay, we show that maybe the right call wasn't made or the right spot wasn't made, and then you're told, well, yeah, but replay assist can't help with that, or you can't challenge that. You're like, well,
yeah.
Everybody in America just saw that it's wrong. I mean, why can't we fix it?
Yeah.
So I think, and I've been on a lot of shows this week. I do believe that, when you've got a league that is partners with some of these gambling sites and promoting gambling, and fans are betting on these games more than they ever have, and you hate to cross the line and start talking about gambling and all of that, but it is a reality in the world in which we're in, that a lot of money, forget the teams that are winning and losing and what they have at stake. You've got fans that are, a lot of money changing hands on some of these calls, and if they see that they're not accurate, it's a slippery slope, in my opinion. They've got to be able to fix that, but where does it end? And it keeps going back, in my opinion, to the fact that, I lost going to a Rose Bowl because of a wrong call against USC when Eric Affolter caught a ball that was out of bounds in the back of the end zone from Rodney Peete, but it was ruled a touchdown, and they beat us. And even with that backdrop, I've never been a big. When I was playing and they voted on instant replay, I was not in favor of it, and I was of the mindset of Bill Parcells that said, if you can't get all the calls right all the time, then I'm not in favor of it. And that tends to be what I believe. Now, some people will say, yeah, but at least they get some of the calls right some of the time, and I would say, yeah, that's right, and that seems to be better than none of the calls. But if only one team is getting the calls for whatever reason, there's no conspiracy. I'm not suggesting that at all. But if only one team is getting the calls because those are the only plays that might be reviewable and these other calls aren't, then it's an unfair advantage to that team, and you're tilting the field in one team's favor. So I think they've got to take a hard look at a number of things and just decide, okay, if we can see that it's wrong, we have to be able to correct it. And it would seem, now I made this comment on a show this week, and I was told that it already exists, and I'm sure that it does, that there's a chip in a ball. I know there's chips on the shoulder pads and all that. They say there's a chip in the ball. And I don't know technology or what they can do and what they can't do, but it would seem that if there is, in fact, a chip in the ball, that they could determine where the ball is in a scrum, whether you can see it or not see it. The question then is the knee on the ground? And you got to weigh that as well. But I do think the league, they want to get it right, and the competition committee will look at it. And I do feel that there's a little bit of a groundswell that's going on because of the last couple of weeks of the playoffs, that we will see some changes going into next year.
Are we going to see you at the Super Bowl next week, or are you staying away?
I'm going in on Saturday. I've got a couple of events. It's a great week for former players to go in and attend some of these events and pick up a little extra spending money, and I'll do some of that, and then I'll be back. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to have a party. I used to always have a party at my house when I was not calling the game, and I haven't the last couple of years. I've watched the game in Santa Barbara, and I've kind of enjoyed it because the games were in Arizona and then Vegas, and I kind of enjoyed just sitting there, being able to actually hear the game, watch the game without the distraction of having a lot of people. So I'm weighing that right now, but it's a great. Those are, it's my off season. That's the biggest decision I got to make here.
That's tough.
Super Bowl Sunday,
That's tough. Well, if you have the party, let us know. Let us know, and we'll talk next week. We'll talk more about it next week.
That'd be great. All right.
All right. We'll see you.
You bet.
That's the great Troy Aikman.